For straight fabric, weeks 1 and 2, we have 2 different climbs to work with. We have the accessible French climb, and then the more challenging bicycle climb. We can work on them both. They are essentially the same thing. The bicycle climb is just kind of a continuous alternating bicycle climb or French climb. But this is just, it's another name for the basic climb that we know. So we'll start with our hands nice and high so we can hang into our hands. We're gonna lift the right leg around, circling the tails to catch it on the top of a flexed foot, keeping that nice and lifted. Hang into the hand so that we can lift the other leg and press into the fabric and squeeze it between both of our feet and extend it out in front of us to hang in this nice L position. Squeezing hard into the feet, I can then lift my hips into the poles and then finish pulling myself up with my arms so I can take my hands higher and then adjust to repeat. The bicycle climb is taking that same basic wrap and then taking, instead of putting my foot onto the tail, I'm wrapping around the poles above my foot, catching the instep of my other foot, extending into it as I bring the tails into my hips with my right foot. I then reach my hands higher and repeat, alternating that wrap into the poles, pushing in with the instep and bringing the tails to my hips. Next on the list here, we have our figure 8 foot lock. So from our basic wrap or our basic break, what we'll do is take the top foot off of our break to push into the poles a couple feet above our foot so that we can circle the feet around the poles to go across the foot to the pinky toe side of the foot, then under the foot to catch our lock. This creates a figure 8 pattern over the foot and why it's called the figure 8 foot lock. Next on our list, from our figure 8 foot lock, we have a few different shapes to work on. We have first the hip crease balance, which would start with me just standing with the fabric centered, taking my free left leg here, lifted up towards my chest so that I can put the poles right next to my hips here. I'll lean right to get it to catch into my hip crease, start rotating my hips forward and down as I continue leaning to catch it. If I reach with my bottom arm and then my top arm, I can hold myself here hands free for my hip crease balance and potentially work towards reaching without them. Grabbing back onto it, I can pull up and stand back into my lock. After this, we have some separated things to work with. So from my figure 8 foot lock, I will open up the pole fabric here. I can grab about head height, and we can start with hanging into arms, pushing the lock in front of us for back art. If I lift my hips and bring them through the fabric, including my free leg, catching the fabric in my armpits and pushing my hips forward, I can then take my arms wide, leaning into the poles for ship's maiden. From my ship's maiden, or just from standing in my foot lock, if I take my hands about head height but bring my elbows through the fabric, I can lean forward to hang into straight arms and find front art, pushing my lock behind me. Then lastly, we have our pigeon roll up. So I have my right figure 8 foot lock on. So that means that I'm going to be holding on to the right pole. If it's on my left foot, I would be going to the left. But here with it on my right, I'll hold the pole on the right side, head height. I'll lean through the open poles with my free leg and my whole body, turning towards the fabric. Then I'm going to take my left foot. I'm going to push the opposite pole down to my ankle and then lift my hips up into the poles, take my leg through the poles and let my hips and chest follow so I can land in the pole and hands on my front body. This is a single pigeon roll up and I can stop here. But if I want to go further, I can just keep rolling out towards my free leg, continuing to push that opposite pole down to my ankle to make space for me to roll up into the pole. And then from here, if I'm in my roll up, I can also add this standing cupid, and I could do it at any point. It has a bigger effect the more rolls that you add to it. So the idea from here though is that I would just be holding on about face height and pushing away. I kind of do a push and pull to get the foot underneath me and then push the fabric tension in front of me for my cupid. laying back into the fabric to find my pigeon, I can roll out. Since I rolled in twice, I have to roll out twice and then add an extra to get back to my footlock. 1, 2, and then through the poles to get back to my footlock. Now, from here, if I want to push my locks or my lock off, I always want to push it off my toes, and then I can step right back onto the wrap to catch my basic break, and I can descend from here. Continuing on, though, in the skills for this week, our next piece is for our suspender drop. And for the suspender drop, we need to make sure that we're at least 3/4 of the way up. So it's very important that we try to gauge it being above the block fabric, because this is a slack drop. So we do want to make sure we have height. We can practice working on X-back and other things down low, but the actual drop itself must be done up at higher height. So from my basic climbing break, I can open up my poles, release my break, come through the tails, invert straddle, and crochet both legs. Then I'm going to trace the fabric as I push my hips forward into the fabric and trace it behind my back and then cross it once. I'll bring those tails back into my armpits and squeeze them so that I can hold on to them with my armpits. From here then, I can reach up and grab this fabric here that's at my hips as I undo my crochets and straddle my legs wide. From here, I'm going to sit up. I'm going to bring the tail fabric to the poles as I sit up, and it catches this tension. This is also kind of a cool little, cape. So it's kind of a fun thing to hang out in like a crucifix. From here, to get the suspender drop set up, I'm going to take my legs through the tails from the middle, circle them out and around, and collect dance wraps on my tails. Then I can hold back onto the poles, squeeze into those tails as I do, so that when I lean back and away, the tail fabric that's over my shoulders needs to get caught by something, otherwise the slack will get released right away. So I'm going to be holding on to it as I tip back into my straddle. When I'm ready, I can release my hands and pull my hands out like I'm taking my hands out of my pockets, and I'll drop into the suspender drop itself. Everything gets pretty good and tight, so all your dance wraps, everything gets a little bit more cinched in place, and it stays pretty nice and tight here. I'm not really going anywhere. So I can take a nice breath before I sit up and continue on with a couple of different options to exit. The easiest one, and the thing that everyone should practice because it helps us work on letting fabric unravel, is just a basic break. So if I sit up from here, I'm going to bring my feet together and I can squeeze them together, and it acts like a break. This is pretty secure if I just have my feet flexed, but for beginners it's good to just keep everything nice and tight. When I'm ready, I'll take my hands high, hold on to that fabric. I'm going to kick off these wraps, give myself a little swing so I can come through, and then circle to catch my basic break, and I can descend. The other option coming out of my suspender drop is doing this with a Chicago slide. So I'll set up the drop again really quick so we can talk about it. Gotta come through these tails. Come here. Now, instead of just grabbing high and unwrapping these, what I'm going to do is grab onto this fabric in front of my hips with strong arms. I'll undo my wraps and bring the fabric to the poles, hold it together. I'll give myself a little invert back into my straddle, and then hold just the tail fabric. Adjust myself. So, holding just the tail fabric, tighten in front of me with strong arms. I can then cut a leg across both poles and catch it in the back of my knee, extending my free leg behind me so I can lay back into my X. This is a traditional Chicago slide setup shape. And then with just okay grips, I'm letting that fabric slide in my hands until I can see myself, a few feet from the ground. I can go back to my straddle, bring my tails to the poles, and sit up. And I can stand into the ground to exit.